Welcome to the 2013 Iraq Veterans Against the War National Convention. Let's get a round of applause and make some noise, please.
This weekend in Chicago, our members are gathering for our annual national convention. So this is kind of the time where we come together from across the country as an organization to figure out what we're going to do to continue to address militarism and the wars abroad.
My name is Vincent Emanuele, and currently I serve on the Board of Directors for Iraq Veterans Against the War. I've been a member of Iraq Veterans Against the War for almost 7 years now, and I have to say, first and foremost, that is why we're here today in this building. It's because of the people who are scattered throughout this crowd, not only members, but allies, but most importantly, the members, who create these spaces, who allow these spaces to exist, who open up themselves in very vulnerable ways to make sure that people in the public and our fellow community members and people around the world understand that there are veterans who care about these issues and who are dedicating their time to creating a better world.
I was in the Army from 2001 to 2006. I deployed 3 times in 5 years, once to Kuwait before the war, twice to Iraq after the war with the initial invasion, and then again in 2005. I did satellite communications. I was a signal soldier.
This organization has saved my life. As a veteran coming home, dealing with alcoholism, dealing with drug abuse, dealing with feeling alienated and isolated and lonely, and looking for a community of people who would understand where I'm coming from. A community of people who would help support me, would sit there with me while I cried, while they cried, while we laughed, while we partied, while we hung out, while we learned together, read together, organized together, struggled together, and continue to do that today. And so I want to make that very clear, that this is why we're here today, and that is the organization that has allowed this to take place, and that's Iraq Veterans Against the War.
I'm a female Iraq combat veteran. I was a medic in the Army. I'm a part of Warrior Writers. I'm a workshop facilitator as well as a poet and a performer. So I discuss my experiences through poetry and storytelling, which I find is really, really effective. I'm really involved in arts and healing and expressing yourself in creative ways. How I got involved with IVAW was one of my friends that was deployed. Her name is Tina Garnanez. She sent me an email when I got home, and she was like, hey, you need to check out this organization. I think it'll help you. Even though she didn't know I was having problems, but I was. I thought it was normal to come home and be unemployed and drunk. Because I didn't want to admit I had any kind of severe PTSD. So I met Kelly Doherty, and my service officer was Bill Perry, and that's how I became involved in the organization, because they helped me get my disability claim. I like being here because I like being in a community that understands that females were in war and have a voice to be heard. That's what I work for when I'm out in the community outside of the convention. But this is a nice, safe space where people know who I am. They know that females were in war, and that's really helpful and accepting.
So what are we doing here this evening? Robert Clack and I tried to start conceptualizing this event many, many months ago, probably about 8, 9 months ago. Originally, what we had in mind was to have local community leaders here, along with folks who can better provide a bigger analysis of military-industrial complex, of ecological devastation, and so forth, but connecting that to the issues that are happening here in Chicago. People have to realize that the city that we're living in Cook County, 1/4 to 1/5 of African-American children simply cannot meet the minimum requirement of 1,000 calories a day. We have 50 schools that are shutting down. We have a neoliberal attack by Rahm Emanuel on all of our public services and goods. And this continues today. And yet we'll go to events where there's, say, anti-home foreclosure events, but then simultaneously those folks aren't showing up to the events that we're having that are anti-empire, anti-militarism events. And yet the same folks who show up here, vice versa, they're not showing up to the events in the community neighborhoods. And how do we build those bonds? How do we work with the people in Chicago, particularly for us this evening, My question is, and I think what Robert would like to get across, is how do we connect the issues of violence abroad with violence at home? As Dr. Martin Luther King mentioned in the 1960s, every bomb that's dropped in Vietnam explodes in the streets of America. This same concept rings true today. While we spend trillions overseas, our nation quite literally crumbles from within. I want us to keep all of this in mind as we move along tonight.
Yeah, last night we had some really great speakers on a panel that was around U.S. militarism, the changing face of militarism, and how it's affecting folks both overseas and here in the States as well.
What they imagine the role of Western militaries being is essentially a campaign of open-ended, global-scale counterinsurgency. And this is the new justification for $685 billion. It should be noted, of course, that most of that doesn't go on counterinsurgency. Most of that isn't about body armor and MREs for, guys trooping up and down mountainsides in Afghanistan. Most of that is still about overpriced airplanes and bombs. But the discourse to justify the price tag doesn't have to mirror the actual spending pattern. So I think the emerging discourse that justifies U.S. militarism is this idea of managing a planet that is sliding into chaos. Never mind that U.S. militarism has been one of the primary causes of this chaos, along with neoliberal economic restructuring, which systematically undermines governments' abilities to deal with anything like the crises that climate change are now pushing on states in the global south.
We're potentially getting involved in Syria to a certain extent. There could be mission creep and we could find ourselves there. We could find ourselves in Egypt potentially. We could, we're starting to put more troops in places like Australia to place pressure on China. So, our imperialism is, it's global.
That is, in a sort of sloppy nutshell, why I think we have this massive machine that breaks people's hearts, drives people crazy, and leaves people dead and maimed.
We're discussing potentially rebranding or even a name change. We're discussing what those possible names could be. We're discussing what to oppose if the wars do in fact end. Drone warfare is a particular form of militarism that we feel is the future of militarism, and so we're discussing ways to articulate our message against the propagation of this form of warfare.
Some of the things that have changed for us as an organization that are important for us to think about organizing are the official end of the war in Iraq, the drawdown being set for 2014 for Afghanistan, and the fact that the military is pushing service members out, reducing the size of the force. But instead of giving those service members the care that they need and deserve, they're getting pushed out on bad conduct discharges with other than honorable discharges that give them no benefits. And for psychological reasons that the military likes to say are always pre-existing conditions when we know even if folks do have prior trauma that the military does a lot to compound that, and that we know everyone who has served in the military, every veteran has trauma and has injuries because of the war. So, something that we're talking about is how do we heal as a community while still fighting to stop the conditions that allow illegal and immoral wars and military actions to happen in the first place.